is because we're not framing our mental models, to use the sort of term that Peter Senge uses. Our way of looking at things is not the appropriate way of looking at things, is not a kind of practical way of looking at things from the point of view of what does it take for people to share knowledge.
So are you saying, in essence, the organization is getting in the way
Yes.
of moving knowledge?
That's exactly.
Doesn't it get back to matrix management, which is a concept born a long time ago, that try to eliminate the hierarchy and let the organization function, on a matrix basis, on a responsibility or a purpose basis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think in practical terms that I'm not sure whether the matrix is appropriate, because I think that the work that we do today, which Peter Drucker called knowledge work, knowledge workers, and knowledge work, doesn't. The best way of describing how we get that work done is not through matrices or structures in that sense, but through networks, and those are fluid and dynamic. And so when we think about structures, really, that's the sort of structure that we're thinking about. What does it take to support those networks and to make them the heart of the heart of the way we organize? So structure is really in the structure of organizing is in the connections that people make. And as Neil said, the connections that people make is largely through the conversations they have. That's how people share knowledge. And so if you're really serious about sharing knowledge, moving knowledge around, we've got to, in a way, structure it so that our processes reflect the way in which people share knowledge. Yeah.
Your description of focusing on organization and from the top rather than the work processes sounds like a simple explanation for why organizations have a tendency to always reorganize to solve every problem.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, again, I would use, my sort of fairly dogmatic way of looking at it is to say that in a way we're obsessed with the organization. And so when there's something wrong, we say, well, where's the problem? It must be in the organization. Let's reorganize. And the way I look at it is to say that is fundamentally the organization is a distraction. It's an abstract notion. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience. I know of organizations where there's a group of people whose job is to turn out a new organizational chart about once every week. And that's not an exaggeration, And somehow we invest all this interest in the organization chart, that somehow this matters. But my sense is it does. It matters to the view from the top, because the view from the top is really all about that structure. But it doesn't matter to the view from work, where, from the perspective of people actually getting things done. And since the view from the top dominates, we keep coming back to the organization, and therefore to the reorganizing and so on. And it just becomes like a sort of endless cycle of reorganizing. Somehow we're going to get the structure right. That seems to me the way we look at it. If we keep doing it often enough, we'll come up with the right structure. But with knowledge, I think structure was all important in factory organizations, where most of our thinking about the stuff still comes from. That's the problem. We're still sort of deeply embedded in 19th century views of work. I've got some slides on it, but when you say, well, why this focus on the organization? Why the focus on structure in a particular way, that hierarchical structure and so on? Because in many respects that made sense in factories. And if you listen to the way we talk about organizations and work and so on, it's still that language. We talk about outcomes and efficiency and inputs and outputs, and it's a factory language. And that's not the language of knowledge work, and it's not the language of sharing knowledge or moving knowledge around. Yes. So, I'm sorry, Penny, can...
After 20 years with the government, prior to CSC, I came to the conclusion that, of course, government, the organization chart was not based on the factory model because if they were producing anything, it was people processes.
Right.
Well, they're not producing, yeah, they're
Right,
producing
right.
paper and
Right,
processes,
right.
but not widgets.
Right.
And what I came to realize was that every time they changed the organization chart, it had nothing to do with making the process better. It had everything to do with power
And control. Right.
and how to block certain people from power and how to give other people power
Right.
that they wanted to promote
Right.
in the organization. And so that model, the organizational model of organizational org charts didn't seem to quite match in government as it did in the old industrial age.
Right. And I'm not disagreeing with that. I mean, I think that there was this idea of that was around at the same time as the factory models were being invented, and that's the bureaucracy, the administrative bureaucracy, which had a
Personnel processes.
which had a structure, and so in a way your org chart really came to reflect the way you designed that bureaucratic work process, the division of labor in administration, I think, rather than in factory, in a factory context. So I'll just sort of flip through some of these. The dilemma or the conundrum. I mean, to me, and going back also to the previous slide, is that I'm concerned that with a lot of things we do when we do work on organizations, consult in the area of organizations and organizational change, and this goes back to the 19th century, it goes back to Frederick Taylor, scientific management, is that we put this sort of this veneer of science on our thinking about organizations, and we try to make it technical. But it seems to me that knowledge is one of those areas where it helps us to remove that sort of layer of science and the technical language and say, well, what is, ultimately what's knowledge management all about? And the idea is that it's a very human, it's the most, I'm suggesting the most fundamentally human activity. I mean, if we think about humans and other animals, what is it that distinguishes us from the other animals? And it seems to me at least two things. The one is the fact that we do organize. We do things with a purpose. And that in order to organize, we share knowledge. And that, I mean, to me, that's a sort of fascinating issue, reflection that in some ways that's where our humanity, our humanness is reflected in the organizing and in the knowledge sharing. And if I ask the question, because it is an interesting response, if I use the term organize, what comes to mind when you hear that term? Because it's not a word that we use very often. And we talk a lot about organizations, we don't talk much about organizing. So do you have any reaction to? I find people actually have difficulty hearing the distinction between organization and organizing, because it's not a familiar, we're so focused on the organization. And when I've asked people about this, they've talked, well, anything that organizing means to them is labor unions, That's where they know about organizing. That's the only time we talk about organizing, is organizing labor, workers.